in California. And we are now recording the meeting. I'll start off with a few housekeeping rules. First, we would like to thank the Leslie Center for the Humanities at Dartmouth College for supporting this conference. We have a 1 password protected Zoom link per day, and the sessions will be recorded, but not the continuing the conversations that will occur as Q&A after some of our sessions. In addition, we have 4 blocks of open office hours where Dartmouth staff and faculty will hold information drop-in spaces for participants to connect on a series of topics. Please be sure to check the schedule for more information about those individual sessions. Each morning, as with today, you'll receive an email with the schedule, Zoom link, password, and any messaging that the presenters would like to send out in advance of their sessions. If you have any questions or difficulties accessing the links, please email Meredith Steinfels, whose email will appear on the chat and you've probably seen in previous communications. On Friday, our last session of the symposium will be an informal unconference session. And as themes and topics emerge throughout the next couple of days, we'll gather that information in a document that will be shared each morning of the symposium. Our hope is that we can look at this document as a foundation for partnerships across institutions and a call to keep going in our efforts to examine our cultural heritage and the language we use to describe it. Now, for those housekeeping guidelines, as ever, please mute your microphone when you are not actively speaking. If you have a question, please pop it in the chat preceded by an uppercase Q so that we can see it and that the session moderators will monitor that chat and coalesce all the questions for our presenters as they arise during the presentations. If you'd like to be able to ask the question directly to the participants, please indicate that in the chat. Many of the topics we touch on over the course of the symposium are difficult and complex and may feel polarizing for some. We ask that everyone lead with generosity when responding to our presenters and fellow attendees. Please do not use the Zoom session to directly message the presenters or participants. And any inappropriate conduct, such as, but not limited to, harassment of presenters, moderators, or other attendees, racist and abusive language will not be tolerated. Violating these guidelines will result in being removed by the moderators, and anyone experiencing harassment should email Meredith at the email that has appeared in the chat. And please flag those messages as urgent. I'll now turn it over to Meredith and John Bell for some opening remarks.
So good morning, good afternoon, or evening to my colleagues across the globe. My name is Meredith Steinfels, and I am the Assistant Director, Digital Platforms, Media, and Archives at the Hood Museum of Art here at Dartmouth. For a brief description of myself, I have blonde hair, peach skin, and green eyes, and I'm wearing a gray sweater sitting in my office at the museum. As with many of our public events, I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. But before I do, I want to lead with the note that this acknowledgement is not a pro forma. It is not a thing that we are doing because everyone else does them. The ethos and intent behind this acknowledgement are at the core of the symposium. We are actively, as a group, recognizing the impact and violence of settler colonialism, from the theft of land, looting of heritage, eradication of entire peoples, and erasure of identities, whether through physical acts or the imposition of language. The Hood Museum of Dartmouth is situated upon the ancestral and unceded lands of the Abenaki people. This acknowledgement reminds us of the significance of place, the continued existence of Indigenous peoples, and the museum and Dartmouth's commitment to building respectful relationships with those who call these lands home today. So the idea for this symposium, or at least the project that was the predecessor to the symposium, sparked after I had the privilege of listening to our curators work their way through the museum's list of subject tags. Some of the tags were easy to cull from the system because they were slurs. Some of the tags were a little bit harder to reconcile. These were commonly used words that were just starting to be problematized, but are still very much in the vernacular of people visiting museums, or researching in libraries and archives, and these terms are even used by fellow scholars. The curators debated on the necessity of keeping those terms in our thesaurus to maintain accessibility of the collection. On the surface, many of these terms seem harmless unless you dig into why they are harmful. A golden age might seem like it's this, era of discovery and possibility until you realize that it was also a time of colonization and violence. And so when you remove these terms from our databases and our websites, these spaces become safer and better places, but we still need to make sure that they are accessible. I emailed John Bell, who's one of our co-hosts, and I asked him what it would take to build a fully configurable thesaurus tool into our website. The tool would contain a custom-defined taxonomy where we could remove problematic terms such as golden age, but keep them indexed alongside their more appropriate synonyms. In addition, I envisioned a mechanism that would trigger a pop-up whenever a user typed a slur into the keyword search. Pop-up would say something like, "You wrote this word, but it is inappropriate, and here's why. Try some alternate terms such as," and then the pop-up would tell you maybe what you should use. So we looked around for funding to see what a prototype would look like, what it would cost, and how we could achieve that. And when we brought it to the Leslie Center for Humanities to request those funds, they said, "You know that this is bigger than you, right?" And we did, but we didn't realize how much bigger until we saw how many people actually registered to talk about this with us. And at the Leslie Center suggestion, we pivoted to using grant funds for this symposium, because we wanted a place to hear from our talented colleagues actively tackling the issues of language and description, of the intersection of words and identity and technology and accessibility. And from that call for proposals, we've gathered several brilliant panels looking at everything from crowdsourcing alt text to designing impactful exhibitions across generations, cultures, and differing foundations. Our hope is to learn as a community, to find partners, and to ensure that this essential work continues to thrive.
Good morning. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Bell. I'm the director of the Data Experiences and Visualization Studio at Dartmouth. I'll add my welcome to the others that you've already heard, and thank you for joining us at this Terms of Art Symposium. I want to just briefly say a few words about why we brought together all the guest speakers that you're going to be hearing from. For many of you, this is going to be redundant. You chose to register for Terms of Art for the same reasons that we organized it, that Meredith just described. But I think some things are good to say out loud, even when you've heard them before. So I teach a class on metadata systems, and one of the things that you tend to do in those classes is try to define metadata. Books or articles often will give you the standard sort of data about data definition, but that's more cute than it is useful in a lot of ways. And so we end up having to talk through it in the class. Generally, we end up deciding what's more important to pin down isn't what metadata is, but why we create it and how we use it. Metadata is about communication and context, right? I have this blobby little web of concepts in my head, and I want to make that same blobby little web of concepts appear in your head. Just listing out all of the individual parts does nothing without also communicating the context that glues them together. We're limited, though, by the abstraction layer of language. Not only is it imprecise in general, but it's also inflected by our backgrounds and experiences in ways that ensure two webs are never really going to line up exactly. If I say soda and you hear pop, it's reasonable to say I was understood. If I say soda and you hear extension cord, then that's going to be a little bit harder for us to work around. For a long time, the solution to these sort of problems of communication was to hone these really sharp definitions and push them out into the world. Metaphorically, that's like me carving that little concept web in my brain into a stone tablet, handing it to you, and then walking away. That kind of take it or leave it statement isn't communication. communication requires listening and comprehending as much as it does speaking. In short, communication requires respect. Otherwise, we're all just talking to ourselves, and that doesn't really seem all that useful. Good metadata listens. When it's created, collected, and managed well, metadata becomes the translation layer that sits between my web of concepts and yours to ensure that we understand one another. It doesn't replicate my idea in your head or your idea in my head. It merges the two to create something that's both familiar and new to each of us. Unfortunately, many of the systems and methods that we use for metadata management are still designed to be rigid. I mean, look, I'm a programmer, and programmers like things that are solid and stable and fit neatly into the models that we build out of code, because cultural complexity scales faster than programmer time. Even if you do find a flexible tool or you design an ideal data system, the realities of working in chronically underfunded galleries, archives, libraries, or museums means that you rarely have time to put as much care into describing the collections as you might want. The reality, though, is that knowing that less metadata makes collections less discoverable and therefore less useful doesn't end up granting you more hours in the day or dollars in the budget. You still have to find a way to do it. Those circumstances make the presentations that we're going to hear even more remarkable, in my opinion. When we put out this call, we were thrilled to hear from folks working at organizations around the world who have had to deal with these logistical realities and still put in the time and effort to push collection descriptions in directions that are more inclusive, multifaceted, and aware. Personally, I'm really looking forward to their presentations so that I can spend the next 3 days doing what good metadata does: listening, learning, and growing. So with that, I'll just say that the first session is a discussion on reparative archival description work that has been done here at Dartmouth's own Rauner Library. That will begin at the top of the hour. Until then, we're going to take another few minutes to finish setting up, and we will be back with our first presentation shortly. So see you soon.